Okay, so tonight, actually this quarter, we're going to be studying Joshua and Judges. And I think, let me see, I think I wrote down, so it hasn't been long that Joshua was not in your reading, right? So I think the beginning of the first half of March, I think, was the reading of Joshua. So this is just a review of that review, okay, tonight. You probably will not hear anything new. Joshua and Jacob are two of the books that we spend a lot of time talking about, don't we? We use a lot of examples out of there, and we especially like to talk to our children about it. And there's some great accounts that are in there with very easily recognized blessings from God. And when you're teaching children, you really want to very positive, and you want to see the negative. Okay, they're very clear, in what you're trying to teach. So let's pretend that we're, in the preschool class tonight, and do the best we can to recognize the blessings and the cursings and what they really are meant to teach us today. We will spend through March and most of May talking about Joshua. There's a couple of things you'll note. We're not going to talk a lot tonight about Rahab, okay? Even though Rahab plays a very important part in tonight's first 6 chapters. But we're going to talk about her a little more on the 10th. Any reason, can you think of a reason why I might want to do that? Anybody? Loud. Heard? Okay, true. But what part does Rahab play in the overall scheme of even our redemption? She's in the lineage of David and the lineage of Christ, right? Okay, so it's interesting how we do get these sometimes snapshots, sometimes a little more in-depth treatment of these great examples, right? And examples of God making a promise and what it took, to fulfill that promise over the 1,000 years that it took to do some of these things. So then we'll study Judges then for the rest of, I think it's one study in May, and then we'll finish up in June. And if there's not a congregational singing, we will have a perfect review, okay, for us to go through. Not quite Jeopardy, but something that might help us to remember some things from the study. Okay, so as you know, we moved from the Virginia area, and we worshiped at a place called Centerville, which is not too far from Manassas. All of these little towns were involved in the Bull Run battles. Okay, and but we used a curriculum called Our Spiritual Heritage. I don't know if you've heard of that. Some places use it. It's a good place to start. Okay, when you're going to start teaching. And so we used that. And the preschool age had an exercise, okay, that they would go through. And by the time they graduated from preschool, they could go through the timeline, okay, of the Bible themselves. Okay, they had little pictures of men, sometimes kings, and they would go and they would put the timeline up, okay, on the board. Something that, I'm not sure I could have done myself, okay, at that time. Well, tonight I just want to quickly find where we are, okay, in the timeline, if you will, with Jesus. And so this is a test, kind of, right? But not quite. It's really, I think that most of us will know kind of where these things are. So let's look at the next one. Now, I'm hoping you can read this, okay? The idea is to fill in the boxes with when it happened. And I think we probably will all know the first box? Okay, all right, creation, okay? So creation and fall is the first box, kind of, kicks off, begins everything from as we know it, as mankind and the world as we see it around us. Okay, so, and from that, one of the next big events, and these are high, I think we said 30,000 foot. This may be even a little higher than that, okay, view of the timeline. But and the numbers on here are kind of round, except until you get to 1,000. I think that's pretty well agreed to. So the next one would be Abraham, okay, and the covenant that was made. Can someone tell me the third one? After the covenant, the big event, how about Exodus? Okay, from the list, Exodus. All right, and now how about the next big event? Okay, from Sinai going into Canaan land. Okay, I think that would be that one. All right, so somewhere in this area, we're getting close to where we are, right? And so the next one, I think, I don't have Joshua up here, but I do have Judges up here. And so what do you think? What's the next one? United Kingdom, yes, okay. And then the divided kingdom, and then a big problem occurs, right? So then they go into exile, okay, and they return from exile. And I'll give you one guess who's left. Okay, so Jesus is left. All right, so I kind of like this chart because it kind of keeps me, in mind of where we are. But there's some other blocks we could add in here and just make it more complicated. But I think you get the message. They would be able to tell you the whole timeline of really of the Bible, but especially of the Old Testament. And I always thought that was pretty cool. And there was one young man, I'll call him out. Jace was his name. And I think he might have been 2 years old and he could do the timeline. Okay, but he was exceptional. He was, and he still is an exceptional young man. Do you have a verse? Do you have a phrase that you think about when you think of the book Joshua? Yes, okay. I think I saw someone mouth. Be strong and courageous. Okay. And this is actually stated 2 or 3, 4 times in here. And it's something that is said to Joshua. And the reason he's told to do that as it says in the verse, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. So this was very important to God, wasn't it? Because this was the culmination of the promise, right, that he had started. And when did the first promise of this land happen? Who received it? Okay, Abraham. So this is the big answer, if you will, to that promise, from God. There's a question, I think, in the sheets, and you notice some of these are mostly questions. A little later, you'll have, and Judges has a little more support in them. But one of the questions that's asked is, what do you think when Joshua heard this? Okay, was Joshua's biggest issue with his assignment? You're not Joshua, and God has just told you this is what you're going to do, and he wants you to be strong and courageous. And then he tells you why, which is it's only the answer to my promise, okay, to Abraham. So what do you think Joshua might have thought? And this is you can't be wrong, because who knows, other than how he acts. Anybody? we know that Joshua was very faithful, and he probably was viewed as courageous, and he was also probably viewed as strong. And yet, I doubt he saw himself as that. Yeah, he is. Okay, true. Moses was a hard act to follow, right? And I do think that when God kind of made him a hard act to follow, because God said what about his relationship with Moses? I talked with him, right? I conversed with him. And I think that, when you see the statement made that Moses was the most humble person to live, okay? And then when you think about he has this special relationship with God, he talks to him. Okay? It was kind of necessary for him to be that, wasn't it? Because man, from this point on, doesn't do real well for being in charge, okay? So Joshua does pretty good, and they follow God all the time of Joshua when he's alive. But when he goes, it's almost immediate that they begin to fall away. And we'll find that when we get into Judges. And so during the time of Joshua, he's encouraged to be strong and courageous. And I think that from what we can see, he was that. Okay, let's look at some kind of a little bit random ideas about Joshua. It's the 6th book. We just finished the 5th one, right? The Pentateuch. And so this is sort of what today in today's vernacular we would say is where the rubber meets the road, right? So all up to this point has been preparation, making them a nation, making them recognize God, making them see where they were dependent upon God, and that God was going to fulfill the promise. These are the children of those that had come out of Egypt. So they had to be brought up to the same level of understanding as those that had witnessed the sea open and walk across on dry land. And so we see that effort, if you will, in the book of Joshua. My thought was that Joshua would probably be worried about being able to fulfill the promise, because it's all in his hands now, right? He's going to lose Moses. He's not going to be there to help him. The death of Moses happens, and I think that before they can do the conquest, Moses dies, doesn't he? Yes, he has to die before they can go in and do the conquest of the promised land. You remember Joshua's name means the Lord is salvation. We also know that it's a similar name, Jesus, and later was very interesting, I think, what Joshua, the actual original word, means. We'll talk about that a little bit. Okay, so what's the purpose of Joshua? And I think we've kind of hit it, haven't we? It's the fulfillment of the promise, the fulfillment of the land promise that was made to Abraham, and they're going to divide up the land, and there's a whole lot that has to happen. It doesn't happen overnight, and we'll go through some of what that looks like here in just a minute. Centuries later, after this, after Joshua was named, Jesus was given a similar name or same name. Another form of the name is Hoshea, and it's the name of one of the prophets, who is found in the book of Hosea. Okay, so there's this idea of the Lord is salvation is, I think, key. I've never really fully understood how people got this name that perfectly fit them when they were later in life. Okay, how did they know? Well, we better name this guy Joshua because he's going to, take the people into the promised land. I don't always know how all of that fits, but obviously it's not just man doing it. Okay, so we have some dates here to just kind of keep in mind. The conquest being somewhere around 1240, 1190. There are different dates people use. I don't know how much the dates matter, but it does depend on where you start. 1 Kings 6:1 is a start. Judges 11:26. We're not going to go into all of these, but let's read what happens in 1 Kings 6:1. Okay, which is kind of where they sometimes peg the start from. It says, in the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. So the temples, they kind of know when the temple began, so they kind of use that to, peg these dates. I do think when you look in Judges, we won't get to that just yet, but the Judges 11:26, there's another kind of key date that we can use to peg from. This is a terrible map because I can't make it as big as I want. Okay, but I do like this map, and I tried to make it easier. So let's see if I can. Okay, so this idea here of the map is to show how did Joshua begin to enter the land. Okay, and we know that they came up to the back side, the eastern side of the Dead Sea, because we know that they had trouble with both Moab and Ammon that they had to travel through. And when they got up to the north tip of the Dead Sea there, I think that we can see Gilgal there. I don't know if you guys can read it. Let me see. There's a pointer on here. Yeah. Okay, so here's Gilgal. Okay. That becomes Joshua's debarkation point. He comes back to there. Okay, that's his camp. And so several times after he goes on excursions and fights battles, he comes back, and Gilgal is, where his main camp is going to be. And what I like about this map is it kind of tells you the chapters where some of this is going on. So let's look a little deeper. Okay, and where it talks about upon crossing the Jordan, Joshua camped here at Gilgal and then moved to take Jericho and Ai, and afterward they returned back to Gilgal. So we find that in the first 8 chapters of Joshua, and that's the first conquest that it's done, isn't it? When they go into Canaan land, we'll talk about that just a little more. Then let's move on. Okay, so then he comes in and he makes peace with Gibeon. Well, sort of. Right? I mean, Gibeon cheats him, right? Tricks him, and so he is tricked into making a treaty, if you will, with the Gibeonites, which is where near Jerusalem there, and so we can talk a little more about that later. But anyway, he does that. Then he moves and he goes down through the valley, and you can kind of see the curve, right? And that is the valley. On each end is going to be some mountains of that on each side of that. And then I think I got another one on here. Okay, so hang on, let me catch up with you. Okay. So Joshua launches a southern campaign, and that's kind of how we'll look at some of this. We'll talk about north, south, east, west campaigns that he does. That's not really unlike when we talk about sometimes the Civil War. We talk about campaigns in that same way, right? And so, but they were victorious in their abilities to clear out some of the people that live there. The Bible is fairly clear. It talks about victories, but it's also very clear when they don't, when they fail God. Okay, and we'll talk. I think I have some words in here about what they were challenged with and how they do. You know. Let's see where we are now. Okay, so then he goes all the way up north, and I know the map has the Sea of Chinnereth, which is what sea? Of Galilee, right? Sea of Galilee up there. And so the northern thrust up there all the way to Hazor. So you can kind of see, and I think I have the next one back, even though you can't read that, you can follow the arrows a little bit, so you can kind of see what he did. Entered, spread out, went as far toward the sea as he could, as he was told to do, okay? Because all of this, God tells them where to start and stop in most of these cases. All right, so this is another version. I'm kind of doing this thing where let's look at the answer first and then come back and look at the questions, okay? So on the left-hand side is a good map of what Israel or what Canaan looked like, okay, before they went in and conquered it. And this red line is the path that the spies took, and I thought this was a good one to show for that. I have a little breakdown of this. Okay, then on the right, right-hand side of the screen is what it looks like after the tribes have divided it up. Okay. Now I tried to expand it a little bit anyway to show kind of where they fell with each other. Okay, so here's Shechem. All right, and you can see, the divisions of Manasseh. Okay, was given two parts, and to see what was the northern tribes. We'll spend a little more time when we're actually in the division, but this will give you a feel for what the area looks like. This is the bottom part, okay, of it. Okay, so where they had come all the way down, were Simeon and Beersheba. This is where they started for the spies, but we stop a little higher than that. They stop a little higher than that, if you will, when they are dividing it up, okay, into the land. So this is what that final thing looks like then. Okay, hopefully that kind of gives you a feel for. That's the land. Okay, that's Canaan. That's what's going to be taken over, and when you will get sleepy, when you read about all of what happens with the divisions and the tribes and the cities that go to this group and that group and so on. But because if you remember when you were reading it, okay, there's some very long readings about what happens to these. And so we'll talk about them some, but we won't go into that level of detail for all the cities. But you'll at least see, who takes over what and why. Okay. As a matter of fact, before we go, they use lots. Okay, so what is a lot? Okay, so you know what a lottery is, right? And so that's how they decide where who gets to what tribe, and God is behind the lottery. Okay, so we'll talk about that some. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the first 6 chapters, and then let me go ahead and where they mostly talk about entering. Okay, then we're going to have some trouble. Okay, so 7 to 9 is kind of some trouble. They're going to have some issues among them. Okay, there will be bigger issues in Judges, but there are issues that come out. They have to be taught to do what they said they would do, to believe, if you will. And then possessing, which moving in, dividing up, that sort of thing. Who gets what, right? So today, I think most of this is, most of the interaction between God and Joshua at this point is to kind of help reinforce him. Because when Moses was leading, he had God, he had a pillar of fire, he had manna coming, all of this. That kind of gives you a little more oomph, doesn't it, with the people. Manna's going to stop. Pillar of fire is not there anymore. Okay, so it's a different situation for them, for Joshua. So now he has to, what's the word rally? So now he has to rally the troops, okay? And he has to deal with some things up front. We'll talk about that before he can do that. But to have the strength I kind of, instead of using the word strength, I would use the word resolve, which is a form of strength, isn't it? He has the resolve, the resolution to be able to handle this, right? Pull it off. And then, yes, it's going to take courage. I don't know how you go into a battle, lose 20,000 people, and keep fighting. Okay. Now they're not going to lose that many in this case, but you're going to see that many die. How do you keep doing this over and over? You got to have a lot of courage, don't you? And a lot of strength, resolution, to do it. They're going to have some help. They're not winning these battles on their edge of their sword, are they? They're using their sword, but God's doing the winning, right? And we see that right away with Jericho. Then the readying of the troops, preparation, the changes that had to happen with a new leadership, and so on. Okay. If you have your Bibles, you might, kind of keep them open to some of these chapters. We find in the first 9 verses of chapter 1 that Joshua now is what we often talk about is commissioned, right, as the leader. What happens in verse 2? Verse 2, Moses dies, doesn't he? Okay. And, I think that's probably, if I were Joshua, that would be the biggest problem for me, okay, is to see that Moses is now dying. It says, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise and go over this Jordan. God was waiting for this to happen. So Moses had to die because he was not going to let him go into the land. And he wanted new leadership to go to take him in. And so it says, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them and to the people of Israel. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to do is read verse 7 before we go on to the next section here. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. And the book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it daily, day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it, for then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have a good success. And then he repeats the next verse about being strong and courageous. And so that's going to be a problem, right? Don't turn either to the left or to the right. The people are not necessarily always going to do that. And so God will have to deal with that, and he does. And Joshua will have to deal with that as he continues to go into the land. All right, then the next 9 verses or so, let me see here, something's up. For the next 9 verses, we find Joshua then taking over, okay, assuming command. And, one of the things that he does, he reminds those, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Now, if you remember the map on the right-hand side, when they were dividing up the land, they didn't want to cross Jordan. They saw the land they had there. It was great for them. It was wonderful. They wanted to stay there. Okay? So they wanted to stay on the east side of Jordan. And Moses made them promise, right, that if you did that, then you would cross over when the time came to take the rest of the land. Right? And so that's what Joshua is dealing with here. And as he says in verse 14, he says their wives and little ones and livestock could remain on the side, on the east side, okay, of Jordan. And then when this, as verse 15, I like how this is put, until the Lord gives rest to your brothers. So they are going to have to go to battle and stay on the east side and fight until they have rest, right? Till the land has rest. Then they can come back on the east side of Jordan and live with their families that are already there. Okay. What's how would I put it, idiosyncrasy, if you will, of the Jews, and whether it be east or west side of the Jordan, when they go into that land, what is something that's God has said to them, is promised to them, very unique for them, and that they must recognize that this is the case. Will they build a wall? Will they plant? Will they have to plant vineyards? Will they have to, wait for olive trees to have olives? Everything in the land is theirs. So the gift, one of the gifts that God is giving them is that the houses to live in, right, the crops, the fields, the trees that have been planted that are bearing fruit now, etc., those were that tribe's, for that tribe's use. Okay? And in order to do that, they would have to drive out those that might be there and living there. And that's what God had wanted them to do. This was a comment that was made by God to Joshua that says, "No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you." Now, talk about something that will strengthen you. I mean, this is God talking to Joshua and telling him this is how he will be with Joshua. So as he starts to take over, Joshua starts to organize, right? So Joshua is now organizing the people to get ready to go to battle. And so when you look at verse 10, he's talking about telling them to gather their provisions, okay, gather them up, get yourself ready to move, etc. And then he gives them, and I just read this, he gives them the reminder, right? Remember what you promised, okay, that you will come and fight with us. And then I think I'd like to read the last verse here, 18, and we'll go on from there. "Whoever rebels against your command and disobeys your words, whatever you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous." And so this is really meant to strengthen Joshua's resolve, isn't it? Because he has God fully behind him. The things that God would have done with Moses, he will be willing to do. Okay, let's talk for just a minute about Rahab. Okay? And well, I think one of the questions that's in the list is, what do you think saved Rahab? Well, what did save Rahab and his family? Her faith, right? Her faith. Yes, there were some things she had to do, but really it was her faith that saved her. And as a matter of fact, she is in Hebrews 11, right? And Rahab is actually referenced in Hebrews 11. We'll talk about that a little more. But it was her faith that saved her and saved her household. Okay. Now, that also saved and gave gave their Israel, their ability to go into the land, go into Jericho, to know what was needed. But one of the things that she did whenever she was interacting with the spies, she had to trick the king, didn't she? How did she trick the king? King comes, asks what? Comes and asks, where are these spies? Where are they at? And so she kind of tells them, they're not there, they were there, they went out, they left, and told them a direction to go, right? Which was not the direction that the spies had gone, right, at all. So she tricks the king so that they go off looking for him. And then she says, our life for yours, even to death. And so that's, I think, an interesting interaction. So here's Rahab talking to the men that have come to spy. And verse 9 says, I know that the Lord has given you the land. So she had that faith already, right? She knew that was going to happen. This idea of using the red cord. So what was the idea about the red cord? What'd she do? Or rope? Hung it out the window, didn't she? Hung it out the window. And there's some, who want to make something out of the idea that it's red or what. I just think it was easily visible. We often use red to draw attention, right, to things. But she hung that out the window, and because of that, she was able to be saved, and her household was saved. As a matter of fact, before they even went into the city after the walls had fallen, it was Joshua made sure to take care of her and her family. And later we learn, they wouldn't have known this. Later, since we can have 20/20 hindsight, we have it written for us. We can see that Rahab is in the lineage, if you will, of Jesus. Then let's see, the message was, received. Let's go on. Israel crossing Jordan. Okay, this is an interesting thing. So they have the ark lead this time. So the ark's in the front, okay, before they are going to cross over Jordan. So it's leading the cross, okay. In verse 7, the Lord says to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of Israel, that we may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. What do you think? What were those words preparation for? What was going to happen? Well, what happens what does God say in the next verse? As for you, command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, when you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. And so the water's going to part, isn't it? They're going to be able to cross there on dry land. So the crossing of the Jordan is, kind of a big deal. And there's several things in there, I think, that we would, sometimes maybe miss. This idea of gathering stones as they walk through, making a monument, etc. Things such as that, I think is, interesting. In chapter 4, they take 12 stones from the Jordan as they're walking through, okay? And it says when they had finished passing over Jordan, the 12 men, one from each tribe, they were to have 12 stones, and they were to build a monument, if you will. Let me get to that. 4. Okay, so they pick up the stones as they walk through. Joshua builds this memorial, and then they they arrive at Gilgal, if you will. Why do you think that Joshua did that? Why did he make a memorial? Pardon? So for us, right, a lot of times we're told to learn something or to remember something. You may have to do it more than once, or you may have to visual aid, or you may have to repeat it, or you may have some special assignment might have to be made to something to help you remember. Have you ever done any kind of memory study, something that helps you memorize? One of the things they tell you to do is to have an object in your mind when you're thinking of what it is. Now, sometimes I wonder how do you remember the object, but still, they say, have an object in mind, assign that word to that object. Or one of the things that's common to do when if you need to remember several things, the time when you go from your house to the car. So you open the door, that's one thing. Close the door, that's another thing. You walk across the lawn's another thing, etc. So these are all memory aids, right? Well, they didn't really have cars. So they would use things like that, wouldn't they? They could go there. Now, there is a challenge with that. What do they often do? What did they often do when a memorial was set up? They would lose why it was set up and worship it, right? And so sometimes, and we will see this happen over the next couple of chapters, few chapters. We'll see that happening. Ian? Very good point. The next generation has to learn and remember, right? And it's a way to pass that information on to them. We have a similar issue pick up in 5, don't we? What's the first thing that they do? They resurrect the practice of circumcision, right? In the first 9 verses here of chapter 5, we see this. The new generation had not been circumcised when they were wandering in the wilderness. Okay? And so the purpose of that, which was given to Abraham, was a sign, wasn't it? It was a sign to him, the covenant, the relationship that they would have with God. It also helped pull them together as a nation. It was a national thing, right? And a national sign. And we could see that here in the first 9 verses, if you will, of chapter 5. And an interesting comment, and we won't have time to go into it in depth, but an interesting comment here is verse 9. It says, "And the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." And so the name of that place is called Gilgal to this name. They were still wearing that, weren't they? The punishment, if you will, that resulted from their, let's say, if you will, the reproach of Egypt on them was now taken away, okay, from them. And I think that's an interesting way to view what had happened when they sinned, wandered in the wilderness. Now that's all behind them, put behind them with this. Okay, we'll pick up here and going into the next couple of chapters on next Wednesday night. Thank you.